think you're going to draw in a crowd.
Yeah. All right.
We're kind of far away this time.
You're far, I think.
Squish it. I'll move it closer. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Just, different room, different setup.
Get close to our bags under our eyes. There we go.
If you can hear us okay, can you just write in the chat on the right-hand side? And then we're going to get started in 3 minutes. Oh, you guys have some good notes. Ready? Lots of tabs.
Probably not use them all, but just you never know.
Lots of highlights. Good morning, Jen. It must be nice for you to be on the other side of the camera this week.
Where are you seeing? Oh, there.
So I have them there, and then they're also on the right-hand side. That's probably far, but I will keep these here.
This is a learning journey for me today, too.
Oh, is this your first webinar?
Yes.
No way.
I
Oh, that's
participated in
exciting.
one, but this is the first on this side.
Do we have any schools watching yet? I know St. Isabel, Holy Spirit, Mother Teresa have all hopped on in the past.
Everyone's still waking up.
It was nice to come in with Starbucks. Thank you.
Oh,
That's a treat for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know if you wanted both of the tea bags in there or just one.
Well,
I know.
depends on the day.
It was
early.
early. It was called Rev Up Tea, so I was like,
Yeah.
both.
Let's double it up.
I was like, what is a wrap-up tea?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a substitution for coffee, I guess.
All right, we're going to get started in 1 minute. If you are on, can you just let us know that the sound quality is okay?
Sound is great. Perfect.
Good morning, Holy Spirit. Hello.
We're going to miss your comments in the
I know.
comment box this time.
My comments will be live.
Yes. That's perfect. I should move up this way a little bit.
All right, it's 7:45 on the dot, so we're going to get started just because we're aware of everybody's time. I just want to thank you for being here. We know it's getting colder. We know it's a busy time of year. So the fact that you're even watching this, we really do appreciate very much. We'd like to welcome our special guest, Jody Ashton from our Leading and Learning Department. We're really excited that she's here. You often see her great comments on the right-hand side, but now she's live in person. So we're excited to hear her perspective on the 2 chapters that we're focusing on today. All right, Leanne, take it away.
All right, good morning. Hopefully you're fully engaged with us since we're talking about engagement this morning. So I'm really excited to have Jody here with us. When I saw that we had engagement and identity, I thought it was a natural fit to invite her here to share some of her perspective with us this morning. So really exciting. So talking a bit about engagement, I always reread the conditions before we jump online. And so again, like I highlight different things and just on page 103, the statement, the school is among the most demanding of all the forces in students' lives, just really resonated and stood out for me, thinking about how their days can be so depleting and the idea of mental effort.
And just the fact that it said school, right? Not teacher, not principal, the school, right?
Yeah. And thinking about all the factors that can come into play with depleting their mental effort. And sometimes they already come to school depleted. So that whole learning piece can be really difficult for them. I thought that was really interesting.
And part of that, what I thought too, was that the
when we talk about that depletion, we even think about how we got here this morning and what that takes out of ourselves as teachers too, and thinking about the assumptions that we make, what we think of students' attention spans to be. So when we think that they're getting there, that they're there ready and their attention spans are at that full place already, we have to think about that assumptions that we're making about how ready they are to learn that.
Because you often hear the conversation of, well, I'm going to do my harder subjects first thing in the morning because that's when they are most alert. But that's, again, just an assumption that for every student, they're the most alert in the morning, when we know that that's not always the case. So just thinking about that, okay, maybe it's a comfort place for you as the teacher, but really getting to know your students and seeing sort of what they're coming to you with first thing in the morning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I added on the slide deck that idea that, we sometimes think that students have this abundance of physical energy, so that should equal their mental energy, but that's not
good
necessarily
point.
the case. Yeah, I thought that was a really good point too. And that idea that all instruction should be broken down into 10-minute intervals, and after that we risk losing the audience. So that really made me think about what we do in classrooms, and that like we have that those 10 minutes that we've got the kids really captured their attention, and then after that things are kind of lost. So that was a really interesting point for me too.
I thought about that one as well, as those 10-minute intervals. And again, at any grade, and it's going to change a little bit, obviously, with kindergarten through to grade 6, through to grade 8, through to grade 12, what that looks like. But thinking about those times when you have your students in front of you on the carpet, in their desks, is what is that 10-minute interval? What could that look like? Was something that I was really thinking about as well in this.
Yeah, how we engage our students.
Yeah, and how do we sort of structure our instructional time, right? Like, what does that look like in the classroom? Is that 10 minutes your whole group instruction? Is that sort of, in your rotations? What's going on with that 10 minutes?
Just flipping over to page 104 and the math question example. Every time I reread that, I think it's so true that looking at those 3 different examples and how much energy and mental effort it requires. And so I just thought that was interesting how they talk about people tend to avoid spending that mental effort until it's absolutely necessary. And I think we can really see that in our students. And sometimes we forget, we put something challenging in front of them and we don't understand why they can't, attend to that task and try to figure out all the steps that are needed. So I think that example is really neat. And I think as adults too, we often do the same. I'm sure you remember some of those EQAO sessions where a question would come in front of us and I would just think, oh, it's too hard. I don't know.
Yeah.
And we're out right away. And yet we expect that our students are always on and always ready to tackle something challenging.
Yeah.
It was funny when we looked at those questions, I actually looked and I was like, okay, it's telling me this is more mental effort. I paid attention to the automaticity to, oh yeah, I can figure this one out too. Okay. Do I want to take some time? And what I really thought about was that light bulb moment is it worth it?
Yeah.
Is it worth it for me to take my time to do this right now? What am I going to get out of that? I think that's part of it as we think about when we're planning, if we're planning for us for the lesson or are we planning for the learning for the students?
Yeah.
And what is that worth for them to engage into that lesson? So I think that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me of when is it worth it? It wasn't worth it for me to do that question, except for that, can I do it, right?
Right. But I also think too, I wonder if student choice plays into that. So if you were to present the students with multiple problems and then tell them choose one that you're sort of connected to or engaged with, I wonder if you'd see a little bit of a difference, right, when it comes to that. Because again, those were already there for you, right? And you said the first 2 were fine, but then the third one you were like, no.
Is it worth it? Like,
was it worth it, right?
Was it worth it?
So imagine if the student had some choice in front of them, they could connect to one that, they think is worth it and then sort of move forward in that sense.
And just the fact that it says any exertion of mental effort, whether it's for something positive, anything really, it all draws upon that single source of effort. So even if they are doing a bunch of automatic tasks or things that are considered easy, that's still depleting their mental effort. And so I think we think that if it's easy or it's something that's not demanding, that it won't deplete their effort, but clearly anything does. So that I thought that was interesting too. So just looking at that fast thinking versus slow thinking system, which connects nicely with some of the ideas thinking about math tasks or difficult tasks. So those tasks that are done with little thought and just rely heavily on habit. So, the things that we do throughout our day that are almost automatic versus the slow thinking system that's designed to tackle novel and or complex tasks. So when I was reading this, I wrote here the multiple choice questions in EQAO. So if you're one of those, grade 3 or 6 or, whatever educator that supports students doing EQAO, those multiple choice questions where kids just automatically choose something and don't go through the thought process. And we teach them there is thinking involved in some of those multiple choice tasks. So that was a connection that I had there.
I did too, and I put a big here for that because that piece is how do we go? We all are looking to make those patterns and sort really quickly because that's what the human brain does. Is we're sorting and we're going on the path that is the one that we're used to, right? And so thinking about those, if the students are working a lot with those ones that are like the automaticity, the automatic ones, that they go through them very quickly and there's no, it's like the fast thinking. We rely on that one. I think that was a big piece is that we rely on that one because that's our safety one too. Yes. We have to make those quick decisions. But it made me think about how are we engaging students in actually paying attention to the slow thinking system? Because I think we have to pay attention to it so that we don't fall into the fast one, the intuition, which when it brought up that multiple choice, because it's a pattern we see, A, B, C, D, you can easily fall into the fast thinking because your brain's trying to find that pattern rather than go, wait a second, what is it expecting me to do here? And how can we actually take the time to learn what is happening and how am I paying attention to that problem solving? And in that, it made me think of deep learning. It's complex, they're new tasks, it's critical thinking, open-minded. It does require more effort. That can be tiring if we're talking about that depletion, if we're connect the engagement, depletion piece. If students are depleted, how can we?
And that's a whole shift, right? Because you would think that the multiple choice could sometimes be the easier, less, less energy it takes to complete those kinds of tasks versus those one pagers, right? Like I, as the teacher, would totally assume that those would be mentally a little bit easier for students to hop into. Yet it really does demand quite a bit from the student.
It does.
Yeah.
And Jody, just while you were talking, and yesterday when I was reading, I was thinking, would it be worth teaching students about this and teaching them about, how you have your fast thinking system and your slow thinking system and how your brain works and how we process information? I think the more that they know themselves and they understand how we learn, the more it empowers them too. Because it says here that the default state for students, like everyone else, is minimal cognitive engagement. And resistance to expending mental effort. So just that's always our default. And so, like you said, how can we really engage in that learning and that thinking process and sort of bringing our minds to it? And I think it would be worth teaching students about it.
Well, and it's going to connect later to the identity piece that if we're always in that fast thinking system, we are going to base a lot of things on assumptions.
Yeah.
Right. We're not going to get into that critical thinking of making sense and asking questions because we're going to just fall into what's easy, and that really will have an impact on how that kind of fosters our bias, how it fosters what we're thinking, how it fosters what we expect from students. It really makes it makes those connections too.
We're focusing on efficiency, but not depth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. Yes. Efficiency, not depth.
Wow. Thanks. And it's still early. All right, Lise, she agrees with us. These facts can be taught to intermediate students as well to help them discover their own best way. Absolutely, right? Like I think this transfers, K to 12 plus adult learning for sure.
Mm-hmm. And helping students understand why they might feel that, sort of tired mental state, why, do we feel overwhelmed. And they also talked about how if we are feeling mentally tired, then it's harder to self-regulate, manage our emotions. So all of these things are really interconnected. And I think we see that in ourselves. If we are tired and depleted, because we've engaged in a lot of, thinking tasks, then it is harder to manage a lot of the other things, that happen in our lives too. And I think that even more so for our students.
Yeah.
And they may not be able to identify why they're feeling that way. So this is an interesting way of helping them to see that.
Mhm.
And I think it ties really well into that idea of working memory and long-term memory. And I think it's really important to understand working memory. I wrote down a little spot here where it says that we can only hold about 7 units of information in our working memory.
Wow.
And I think now we know that a lot of our students struggle with that working memory piece. So they can't really hold very much in there.
Yeah.
And so being able to manage a lot of things coming at them, multi-step tasks, multi-step things happening even within one block is just really difficult for them.
And that's why you hear spiraling a lot. And you hear it a lot in math, but I think it applies subject wide, is that you have to revisit things, right? Because of that working memory, right? You can't just teach in silos and then hope at the end they remember kind of what you did previous months, right? So revisiting.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about those, that what we can hold on to is also thinking how important the scaffolding is, the creative success criteria with the students, that it is scaffolded and they understand that checklist, that they're able to self-assess. Because part of that too is thinking about, for students, we often like, well, okay, first I want you to grab this, then I want you to go over there and do this, and you're kind of talking to the air.
Yeah.
So, so we're saying, well, it came out of my mouth, it must have gone in, and they're paying attention. But how many students need that? I need the visual on top of that. I need to know what's first, then what. I'm going to give you 2. So it's looking at, when I think of scaffolding and success criteria, it's necessary for some students, but it's great for all of them. And I know that cliche term of necessary for some, good for all.
Mhm.
It really is when you're looking at that co-creating of those success criteria in that, what does it look like, chunks of time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not the top down. And that's what Rolla was kind of mentioning too, is that it has to come from the students, right? In
Yes.
order for it to be
Yes.
meaningful. Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
We go, oh my gosh, sorry. We go back. You guys could have seen something funny there. We go back to that whole, is it worth it?
Yep.
Right? So if they're invested, thanks Rolla for that, because that's a big piece. If they're invested, their opinions in there, man, it's going to be worth it for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And to just touch on some of the points, tapping into previous knowledge, and they talk about chunking. So it says chunking is something used fairly intuitively by educators in early grades, but it can continue to be highly useful strategy to avoid cognitive overload throughout all levels of education.
Absolutely.
So just wondering, sometimes we do all of these things when our students are really young, but then as they get older, we sort of put some of these strategies aside. And so thinking about, when they mentioned differentiation and universal design for learning, that some of these strategies are really important, like you said, for some students, but really all of students can benefit too. So I hate to rush this condition,
Yes,
but we're already
Halfway
halfway through. So anything else important that?
Well, what I wanted to, because we went to the educator depletion piece, and I had every morning I have a chat usually with a friend of mine. We just talk about the day and how to prepare and kind of give each other some points of, and part of that is taking care of yourself. And so how are you going into the morning as you start your day? Because that makes a big difference of when the students come in. If you're coming in a yellow zone, if we want to talk about zones, your students are going to meet you in that yellow zone. So what are you doing for yourself in the morning to ensure that you're not just, we'll talk about that emotionally charged, spiritually charged, physically charged. Like, what is it that that you're doing for yourself? And part of that is the kind of like your own rituals in the morning to get yourself ready.
Hashtag be well.
Hashtag be well. And that's a big piece because we're going to be expecting the students to have that level of engagement, right?
Yeah.
And when we're not there, and then we're going to wonder why they're not there with us.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I highlighted education is a marathon.
It is.
Not a sprint.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
30-year marathon. Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay, so moving to identity. So I'm really excited to have Jody here to support this conversation. And I was hoping that we would rush through engagement so we could get to
The meaty
stuff of identity. So I highlighted the first comment here: school can and should be a fertile place for personal as well as academic growth. So what really resonated here for me was, especially in elementary, coming from elementary, is just allowing students to have that space for growth, and whether it be academic or personal, and trying to just allow them to have as many different opportunities as they can. And so lots of little moments throughout this condition where I asked myself, I just thought, okay, did I do a good job of that? Or how would I change things? So that introspective piece, and not thinking that we can change everything or that we need to change everything, but just those little moments. So the first little point or thought here was the carpenter versus the gardener approach. So I really like that little example to get us thinking about, the environment that we set for our students. And I again wrote deep learning, that idea, that we let kids explore, experiment, be messy, make mistakes. And so that really aligns with a lot of the work that we're doing with deep learning.
Well, and I looked at that carpenter versus gardener approach, and we've seen that planting the seeds is huge for growth, because we have to think about how school was founded, right? It was founded for that we wanted to, pop out students that fit this box so that they're able to go do this job, right? So that was, and we're going to make sure you fit in this box. We're going to find out what's not working for you, so that we're ensuring that you fit into this box, and thinking about you're going to the factory, whatever that is, right? And so it was that conformity, it was that compliance piece. But as we know, compliance isn't learning.
Yeah.
And looking at that, all of a sudden, so that's a deficit-based model, right? So we're looking at the asset-based of, and that's what identity is. It's so beautiful, is really celebrating who they are, what they bring to the table, because that's what's going to make them shine. And so I love that with the planting the seeds of curiosity, because that comes from an asset-based lens of this is your strength. Let's go with that and let it shine. And I think moving from that fit into this box to
conformity is not learning.
Conformity is not learning,
right? Because again, when you look back to education in the past, it was designed for a certain group of people to succeed, right? And how has education since changed, right? We know better, so now we need to do better.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think this is a big question. Who am I? And am I okay? And probably a lot of adults even struggle with that. Inwardly, they all struggle with their identity, torn between who they truly are and who they feel pressure to be. So I thought that was interesting, that pressure piece, where we sort of feel we know who we want to be, but we have those pressures to fit in the box and to be like everybody else. So if we feel that as adults, then our students most certainly feel that they made reference to what their parents want them to be and what educators want them to be. And so I just thought that was a really good little introspective piece to think about.
It is. And I have my daughter in grade 12, and she was applying for universities last night.
Aww.
And so we're sitting there, and she was so afraid. She's like, Mom, do you think I should do this? And it was one of those, this is your thing. But it just is that pressure. And so then I started thinking about watching her, the stress doing last night. I was like, how might we perpetuate this pressure? Right. What narratives are we saying? What are we using? What is kind of that dominant culture that we're putting in is what we see as what it should be, right? And it really came as I was reading this, and then this was happening with me. She's applying for universities. I was just like, how do we perpetuate this uncertainty? Is this a good program? Yeah. What makes something, it's for you. What is going to have you shine? So,
and that comes with a strong identity, right? That we really need to instill, right? That they know who they are and they can pick a program based off of them being so sure of themselves, right? But they're so unsure. And how do we support that? It's very hard.
Absolutely.
I think we often have that conversation as educators that we're trying to prepare our students for. And this question here I highlighted, who decides what the characteristics of a good successful adult and a good citizen are? So, we think that we are setting them up and we are kind of deciding, but I liked that question. Well, who gets to decide really those characteristics?
Well, and this is where it comes in that dominant culture tends to, right? So we have to think about what are we bringing in? What is that hidden curriculum? We have the curriculum we're teaching in the sense that we think all the students are getting this, this content. But what we bring to that, whether it's how we bring our dominant culture into the room, that's the hidden. So our attitudes, our beliefs towards something, what the room's attitudes and beliefs are towards something, and that is forming the students way more than the curriculum that we're bringing. So we have to think about, step back and going, okay, what views and attitudes am I actually bringing in?
What
And who does
resources?
what resources?
Yeah.
And who is it actually supporting? And who is it? What narratives is it perpetuating? And what assumptions and opinions might be formed from that continue to perpetuate?
And how responsive are we being? So are
Yeah.
we going into this, curriculum year having everything laid out and planned out? Or are we sort of being responsive to the students that are in front of us
Mhm.
as we get to know them and as we develop those relationships? You know what I mean? Because it can be a really tricky thing. And I just want to touch on what Jennifer Calver was saying. She said, Jody very nicely said, but she loves the asset-based education, right? Coming at it from a place of, these are the strengths that this student is bringing. Let me capitalize on those, right? Instead of coming at it from sort of what they're missing.
Absolutely. And then we had this conversation right before this morning of you've got a class, use what you in your mind is driving you crazy as an asset. If they're a class that likes to move, you're like, oh my gosh, they don't sit down. Great.
Yeah.
You know that they don't sit down. So how am I using that as an asset? Oh my gosh, I can't get them to stop talking.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That could be that collective, the oral traditions, oral stories. Use that to your advantage.
Great point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I highlighted here that example of the introvert versus the extrovert.
Mhm.
So how many parent-teacher conferences I had where I was like, well, they're really quiet. They need to talk more
Mhm.
because that's what we just do at school. But valuing that, and I think there are genuinely a lot of introverts.
Yeah.
And so we sort of have that assumption that you're not good enough unless you share all your ideas out loud. And so I just thought that was a really good example of sort of bringing that idea to the table of what a student should be without necessarily understanding that there are introverts and extroverts.
And just a little plug, it's a shameless plug, but technology can really help with introverts. So if the oral presentation is something that you are expecting your students to do, think about that. But there's other ways that they can express their strength in that area using technology where it doesn't have to be in front of their peers, where you're still getting them to complete the skill effectively, but that peer stress is removed. So lots of tech tips.
And I think that was a big piece is what do we consider as confident?
Yeah.
What do we consider as understanding and knowing? It's not extroverts that because they're extrovert that they
Right.
have that they're so much confident and introverts are not confident. We have to really look at that. How have we paired that together?
And there's
And
a
why?
book called Quiet out
Yes.
there. If you haven't read it, it is fantastic. It's called Quiet. It's all about introverts and extroverts and actually how the best workplaces have both, right? Is that if you have a work environment with just extroverts, they're not as successful overall than if you had an intermixing of the two types of personalities. So Quiet is a great book.
And that's also going to be culture-based too,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Good
Absolutely.
point.
Yeah.
I don't know about you ladies, but a little bit of an aha moment on the top of page 122 where it talks about grit and having grit and that, kids have different temperaments and different cultural backgrounds. And sometimes we overuse these terms. And I just thought, okay, yeah, little check-in that, as educators, sometimes we, again, bring things to the table or to our classroom without necessarily thinking about who our students are.
Mhm.
So I thought that was interesting.
So we have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So I just
Okay.
want to make sure you get in your points and your ideas.
Maybe if we look at 124, I know that they have the fixed versus changing qualities of diversity. So Jody, I don't know if you want to speak to some of the work that we're doing in the board in relation to diversity. I know you brought some things here with
Well,
you.
there's 5 minutes,
So
great.
yeah.
Well, we're doing a lot in the board, obviously, but it's everybody's work. It's not just the work of Hugh. We're all in this to ensure that we are really delving into equity and what that looks like. It's not, it's really about how are the students all access the curriculum where they see themselves, and they also are able to see what is out there. So it's about those mirrors and windows for students. And I found it very interesting about the changing qualities of diversity versus the fixed qualities. And often we see we can see some obvious qualities, usually skin color, how they're presenting themselves, their gender identity. We can see a lot of things we don't see, and we make assumptions based on how a student might be presenting. And we have to really think about what does that mean, right? Because that's where our biases come in. And if our biases come in based on what we think the student should be doing, based on what we're seeing and not really understanding, I don't know if you've seen like the iceberg, where what you see on the top and then we have no idea what's presenting underneath, then that's when the lower expectations come in, the lack of representation in the curriculum. I think about, and this is where we have the lack of diversity because students don't see themselves. right? And so we're seeing how that in the end then perpetuates that discrimination for students. So we're really doing some work about really understanding for ourselves, so that awareness piece. And it has to come from as educators, that we need to be aware. If you haven't taken some time to read the capacity building series, Culturally Responsive Pedagogy Towards Equity and Inclusivity in Ontario Schools, it's a good start, absolutely, and talks about the mindset of culturally responsive educators, and there's 6 traits.
Okay.
And one of the big ones is that social cultural consciousness. And that's your awareness on how the social culture structures, our socialization, what I'm bringing into the room, how that affects the students' experiences and opportunities. And it does. We don't think it does, but it absolutely does when we think about that. So because it then affects everything else that's in there. So I recommend that. You may know that we've hired an equity diversity advisor, Monte Malepo. If you haven't met her yet,
and give her a follow on Twitter.
give her a follow on Twitter. She is really asking some great questions about what we're doing, and really challenging some of those. Why is it normal? Why are we doing something? If we answer the question because it's always been done this way, or because I learned this way, we really have to start thinking about, because then it becomes about us and not about the students in front of us. And I think that's a big piece about identity is we really need to get to know the students in front of us.
And that's what Tom D'Amico always says. The most dangerous, phrase in education is, well, I've always done it that way, or we've always done it that way. So
Jody, when you were talking, I was just thinking, it all comes back to relationships. So
Absolutely.
that relationship that you have with yourself as an educator, and then that relationship you have with your students. And it was reflected in the condition that, really getting to know your students, and more so than just what's their name, really trying to understand who they are, and who they are as a student, who they are as a person. And I think that goes a long way in understanding.
And connect with them, right? Connect,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That is a big piece. And we think about what are we doing to get to know them, and how are we ensuring that other students are getting to know them at that level as well. And it's not just a name, or they've just happened to be a partnered up. Is taking the time to be able to share at a deeper level, because that's in this book as well, Culturally Responsive Teaching in a Brain, which is another one I highly recommend. It's looking at connecting at a deep cultural level. We tend to sit at the surface cultural level, and that can also perpetuate bias when we sit at the surface. And it's how we connect at that deep cultural level of those values, beliefs, collectivism. Like, it's just so interesting. And that's where we all really will connect.
Yeah.
So
we have 1 minute left.
Yes, if you're interested in some of these things, I know Jody and Allison and Monty, they put a lot of information on Twitter, and there are a lot of really great webinars that are happening, and they often put out the links so you can join in on the learning and the conversation.
And they might not be as early as 7:45 in the morning.
No, they're usually not that early.
Awesome. So any final thoughts as we have our last minute?
My other final thought is engage with the parents in other ways than just calling about what's going on in school. If you're looking about getting guest readers, bring in parents to be a guest reader, and really invite the community in, because you're going to really see students will start seeing themselves and seeing community members and parents engaging, that other than just learning about how that one student is doing in the class, they're being part of the community. So if anything I can just leave with is, how are you engaging your community members and your parents in the school, other than just conversation about student learning?
I think that's a great point. That's an easy place to jump in. Yeah, great point.
Okay, well,
that's
fast and
it.
furious,
That
but
was fast.
I'm going to awkwardly get up now to go and turn off the computer.
So have a great day, everyone. Thanks for all your comments. We're going to look at those now, and
Merry Christmas.
Yes, we'll
Take
see you in
care.
January.
Bye.